She was the star of a million screens, the heartbeat of the TikTok world. But one day she vanished. No posts, no live streams, just silence. Her friends were the first to notice. The absence, the silence, the dread. We need to figure out what happened to her. There are clues, hidden messages. But someone, or something, was watching. Someone who doesn't want the truth to be found. As they delve deeper, they uncover a web of secrets far more sinister than they imagined. What happens when the darkness they've uncovered threatens to consume them all? We're not backing down. Not now. Not ever. Prepare for a journey into the unknown, where every truth reveals a deeper mystery, and every answer comes with a price. The missing ticket.
Amara flipped through the folder, her stomach churning. Then she stopped at a note tucked between the photos. It was written in the same blocky handwriting as the cryptic messages, signed simply with an M. The game isn't over. You're all part of it now. The words sent a chill down her spine. We need to go, Amara said urgently. We need to get this to the police before M realizes we've found it. But just as she turned to leave, the lights in the warehouse flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Amara? Lisa's voice was shaky in the pitch-black room. What's happening? I don't know. Amara replied, her pulse racing. Everyone stay close. Footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, heavy, deliberate steps that were getting closer. They're here, Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. Run. Amara shouted, grabbing the folder and pulling Lisa by the arm. They bolted through the corridors, their footsteps pounding against the concrete floor as they desperately tried to find an exit. The sound of the approaching footsteps grew louder, closer, as if M was right behind them. The warehouse had become a maze, the hallways twisting and turning in ways they hadn't remembered. Panic set in as they realized they were lost. This way, Mike called, leading them down a narrow passage. At the end of the hall was a fire exit, the red sign glowing faintly in the darkness. They burst through the door, the cold night air hitting them like a wave of relief. But their relief was short-lived. Standing in the shadows just beyond the exit was a figure. Tall, cloaked in darkness and unmistakably watching them. Amara's breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, its presence oppressive and terrifying. Get in the car. Mike shouted, and they didn't hesitate. They scrambled into the vehicle, slamming the doors behind them. Mike hit the gas and the car screeched out of the parking lot, leaving the figure standing in the darkness watching them go. As they sped away, Amara clutched the folder tightly in her lap, her mind racing. They had escaped for now. But M had made one thing clear. The game was far from over. The ride back to the police station was filled with nervous energy. They had the folder, the undeniable proof that M had been stalking them, watching their every move. This time there was no way the police could dismiss them. But the eerie encounter at the warehouse lingered in their minds. The way M had stood there watching them escape felt like a message. They were being toyed with, led down a path that M controlled. At the station they were immediately ushered into Detective Roberts' office. His face was a mix of disbelief and concern as they laid out the folder before him. These are pictures of you, he said, flipping through the pages. This M has been watching you for a while. Amara nodded, her voice tight. We found these in a hidden drawer at the warehouse. There's more going on here than just happiness disappearance. M is stalking us too. Robert sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. This changes everything. We're going to have to escalate this to a full investigation. But I need you all to be careful. Whoever M is, they're dangerous, and they've proven that they're willing to take drastic measures to stay hidden. But what about happiness? Tara asked, her voice barely holding back tears. Is there any chance she's still alive? Roberts paused, his expression somber. We'll do everything we can to find her. But based on what you've shown me, I'm not sure this ends well. Whoever this person is, they've been planning something for a long time. Amara felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. The realization was sinking in. This wasn't just about happiness anymore. They were all in danger. The gravity of Detective Roberts' words weighed heavily on Amara as she sat silently, her thoughts swirling. The knowledge that M had been watching all of them for so long, that they were part of some twisted game, gnawed at her. And now, happiness' fate felt like the darkest secret in a labyrinth they were blindly stumbling through. As they left the police station, Mike broke the silence, his voice low. We have to be smart about this. M isn't just some regular creep. Whoever they are, they're always one step ahead. We need to figure out how they knew we were at the warehouse. Could they be tracking us? Lisa asked, her eyes wide with fear. Amara's heart raced at the possibility. She hadn't even considered that. Maybe through our phones. It's not impossible. They all instinctively checked their phones, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No unusual apps or signs of hacking. Still, the idea that M had access to their lives in ways they couldn't even comprehend was terrifying. I think we should get rid of them, Mike said firmly. For now at least. If they're tracking us, we need to cut them off. Reluctantly, they all agreed. One by one, they powered down their phones and left them in Mike's car before heading back to Amara's house. The mood was tense and the air felt thick with apprehension. Inside, they gathered in the living room, the dim lighting adding to the somber atmosphere. We need to figure out how M found us and why happiness was the target, Amara said, pacing. There has to be a connection, something we've missed. Tara spoke up, her voice soft but determined. What if the answer is in the cryptic messages? The ones that M sent us before. Maybe we didn't look close enough. Mike frowned. We already looked through those 100 times. They didn't make any sense. Yeah, but we didn't know what we know now, Tara pointed out. We were thinking about them the wrong way. Maybe they weren't meant to be solved individually. Maybe they're part of a bigger puzzle. Amara's eyes lit up. You might be right. If M is playing some kind of game, then the messages could be the clues. We've been treating them like separate pieces, but maybe they form a pattern. They all huddled together, pulling out the cryptic messages they had printed and pieced together. There were 4 in total, each with odd phrases, random letters and numbers. At first glance, nothing seemed to connect them, but Amara had a hunch. Let's line them up, she suggested, laying the messages out side by side on the coffee table. Maybe there's something here we're not seeing. For a few minutes, they stared at the seemingly random words. Then Lisa pointed to the first message. Look at the second word here. Sunset. And the second word in the next message is crossroads. Amara frowned. So, what does that? Wait, Mike interrupted. Look at the third message. The second word is river. These are places. A realization hit them all at once. The messages are locations, Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're places M wants us to go. But what about the numbers? Tara asked, looking at the codes that had seemed meaningless before. They must be coordinates, Mike said, pulling out a map on his laptop. If we plug in these numbers, they could lead us to M's next move. For the next few minutes, they frantically worked together, inputting the numbers from the cryptic messages into the GPS. As they did, a location began to take shape. A remote area just outside the city limits. It's a spot near the old quarry, Mike said, his face pale. Nobody goes there anymore. It's been abandoned for years. The realization was chilling. M had been leading them all along, breadcrumbing them towards something. But what? Was this where they would finally find happiness? Amara's hands shook as she closed the laptop. We have to go there. But what if it's a trap? Lisa asked, fear flashing in her eyes. What if M is waiting for us? Amara looked at her friends, feeling the weight of their collective fear. But something deeper stirred inside her, the need for answers. The need to find happiness. It might be a trap, Amara admitted, her voice steady despite her fear. But we don't have a choice. If M wants us to follow the clues, then we have to see it through. Happiness might still be alive. There was a long pause, the gravity of the situation settling in. Then we go together, Mike said firmly. We've come this far. We're not backing down now. As they prepared to leave, the unease in the air thickened. Amara packed a flashlight, some basic supplies, and most importantly, the folder of evidence they had recovered from the warehouse. They couldn't leave anything to chance. They set off toward the quarry, the tension palpable in the car as the dark, desolate roads stretched out before them. No one spoke much, each of them lost in their own thoughts, wondering what they would find when they arrived. When they finally reached the outskirts of the quarry, the place was eerily quiet, the wind howling softly through the abandoned structures. The area was overgrown with weeds and rusted machinery sat unused for years. This is it, Mike whispered as they pulled the car to a stop near the entrance. Amara felt a lump form in her throat. The place reeked of decay and forgotten memories, as if it had swallowed everything that had ever come here. But they had no choice. They had to go in. As they stepped out of the car and approached the quarry, the first faint light of dawn began to break over the horizon. It cast long, haunting shadows across the jagged landscape, making everything seem more sinister. "Keep close," Amara whispered, her flashlight scanning the area. They moved forward, their hearts pounding in sync with their cautious footsteps. The quarry seemed to stretch endlessly before them, a gaping mouth waiting to consume them whole. Then suddenly Tara gasped. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the ground just ahead. There, half buried in the dirt, was a piece of paper. It was worn and dirty, but the message on it was unmistakable. It was another note from M. "Welcome to the end of the road. The truth awaits." The note sent a shiver down Amara's spine. They were getting closer, closer to the answers they so desperately sought. But deep down a part of her wondered. Were they truly ready to face the truth? The air at the quarry felt oppressive, the silence around them so absolute that every sound they made seemed amplified. Amara clenched the note tightly, her mind racing as she processed the message. "Welcome to the end of the road." What truth was waiting for them here? "Do you think we're too late?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Amara didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. But deep down she feared the worst. All the clues, all the signs, it had been leading to this moment, and she wasn't sure they would like what they found at the end of it. Mike took the lead, shining his flashlight ahead as they ventured deeper into the quarry. The terrain was uneven, with large chunks of rock and abandoned equipment scattered about. It was the perfect place for someone to hide, whether it be secrets or something more sinister. As they moved further into the depths of the quarry, Amara's mind replayed the cryptic messages and everything that had led them here. Happiness disappearance, the creepy TikTok follower, the police brushing them off, and then M. The faceless entity who had been pulling the strings all along. Was this all part of a larger plan? Was this about happiness, or were they all pawns in some twisted game? Suddenly Tara stopped in her tracks. "Guys, do you hear that?" The group froze, holding their breath. There was a faint sound in the distance, like the slow creaking of metal against metal. It was rhythmic, almost like a swing. Amara's heart pounded as she realized what it was. Somewhere in the darkness ahead something, or someone, was moving. They pressed on cautiously, their flashlights illuminating the path as the sound grew louder. And then just beyond a large rock formation they saw it. A single rusted swing hanging from a decrepit metal frame, swaying back and forth in the breeze. But there was no wind. Lisa gasped, backing away instinctively. "This place is cursed. We need to leave. Now." "No," Amara said firmly, though her voice wavered. "We're close. We can't leave now." But as they stepped closer to the swing, something caught their eye, a figure lying on the ground just beyond it. "Oh my God," Mike breathed, running forward with his flashlight. Amara's stomach twisted as she hurried after him, dread filling her veins. She didn't want to look. She didn't want to see. They reached the figure, and the flashlight beam revealed a girl, her clothes torn, her body battered and bruised. It was Happiness. "No!" Tara screamed, her voice echoing through the quarry as she dropped to her knees beside her friend's lifeless body. Amara's vision blurred with tears. Happiness was unrecognizable, her once bright eyes now vacant, her skin pale and cold. This was the girl who had brought so much joy to others with her dancing, her infectious energy on TikTok. And now she was gone. Lisa turned away, sobbing uncontrollably, while Mike stood frozen, his face pale as a ghost. They had found her, but it was too late. Amara knelt beside Happiness, her heart shattered. The sight of her friend lying there, so broken, was more than she could bear. But even in her grief, something caught her attention. A small, folded piece of paper clutched tightly in Happiness' hand. With trembling fingers, Amara gently pried the paper free and unfolded it. Her blood ran cold as she read the words scrawled across it. "This is just the beginning." Amara's breath hitched, her body shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. M had done this. M had taken Happiness away from them, and now they were mocking them, daring them to continue playing their sick game. But what was the end game? And why had they chosen Happiness? There had to be a reason, something that connected it all. Amara stood, her resolve hardening as she clutched the note in her hand. She looked at her friends who were still in shock and said, "We're not stopping here. We're going to find out who did this, and we're going to make them pay." "But how?" Lisa asked, wiping her tear-streaked face. "We don't even know where to start." Amara's mind raced. The cryptic messages, the clues, M had been leading them all along. But why? What did they want from them? Suddenly a thought struck her. The messages, they weren't just about getting us here. They were leading us to something bigger. We missed something. Mike frowned. What do you mean? Amara pulled out her phone despite their earlier decision to leave them behind, and scrolled through the messages again. Something about the last one stuck out. The truth awaits. What if there's another layer to this? Amara said, thinking aloud. What if the cryptic messages weren't just leading us to the quarry, but to something hidden here? Mike caught on immediately. Like a clue or a piece of evidence that M left behind. Amara nodded. Exactly. There's something here that we haven't found yet. With renewed determination, they began to search the area around Happiness' body, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they looked for anything out of place. Minutes felt like hours as they combed through the rocks and debris, but then Amara spotted it. A small metal box half buried in the dirt beneath the swing set. It was rusted and old, but the lock on it was new, recent. Amara's heart raced as she pulled it free and tried to open it, but it was locked tight. Mike, we need something to break this, Amara said urgently. Mike grabbed a rock and after a few strikes, the lock shattered and the box creaked open. Inside was a single USB drive. Amara stared at it, her hands shaking as she picked it up. This was it. The key to everything. The truth. But as she held it in her hand, a sickening realization hit her. Whatever was on this drive, it might not just be about happiness. It might be about all of them. And M wasn't finished with them yet. Back at Amara's house, the tension was suffocating. The small USB drive sat on the table in front of them, like an ominous ticking time bomb. None of them wanted to be the one to plug it in, but they knew they had no choice. This was their only lead. The only way to uncover the truth. Are we sure we want to do this? Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara nodded, though the pit in her stomach told her that whatever they found, it wouldn't be good. But they had come too far to turn back now. With a shaky hand, Mike plugged the drive into the laptop and they all crowded around the screen. For a moment nothing happened. Then a folder popped up. Amara clicked on it and her heart sank as a series of videos loaded onto the screen. There were 5 in total, each one labeled with a different date. These dates, Tara whispered, her eyes widening. They're the days leading up to Happiness' disappearance. Amara's hand hovered over the first video. She hesitated for a second, then clicked play. The screen flickered to life and there in grainy footage was Happiness, sitting in her room dancing in front of her phone recording a TikTok. She looked happy, carefree, just like she always did. But in the corner of the screen something was off. There, just outside her window, a figure stood watching her. The room went cold as they all realized the horrifying truth. M had been watching Happiness all along. And now they were watching them. The silence in the room was deafening. The chilling realization that M had been watching Happiness all along sent shivers down their spines. Amara felt her chest tighten as the video played on, showing Happiness blissfully unaware of the shadowy figure lurking just beyond her window. Pause it, Lisa whispered, her voice shaky. Can you zoom in? Amara's fingers fumbled over the keyboard as she paused the video and zoomed in on the corner of the screen. The image became blurry, but the dark silhouette was unmistakable. Someone had been standing there watching Happiness as she danced. Oh my God, Tara breathed, backing away from the screen. This is sick. Who does something like this? Amara's mind raced. Whoever M was, they weren't just toying with Happiness. They had been following her, stalking her every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. But why? What did Happiness do to deserve this kind of attention? Play the next video, Mike said, his voice grim. Amara hesitated, but she knew they had no choice. With a deep breath, she clicked on the second video. The footage was darker this time, the angle slightly skewed, but the room was the same. Happiness' bedroom. She was sitting on her bed, scrolling through her phone, a look of confusion on her face. That must be when she started getting the strange messages from M, Amara said, piecing it together. The figure outside the window was still there, but this time it was closer. The outline of a hand could be seen pressed against the glass, just inches away from where Happiness sat. How did she not see that? Tara asked, horrified. Amara felt sick. The figure was so close. Too close. How had Happiness not noticed? But then it hit her, the lights. Happiness always kept her lights on full blast when she filmed, so the glare on the window probably hid the figure from her view. In the video, Happiness continued scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the danger lurking just outside. Amara's hand shook as she clicked on the third video. This one was different. The angle had changed. It was no longer inside Happiness' room. Instead, it appeared to be filmed from the outside, peering into her window from the darkness. The footage was shaky as if someone was holding the camera themselves. Whoever had filmed this was standing right outside her house. And then Happiness came into view. She was dancing again, recording another TikTok, her back to the window. The person filming moved closer, the camera zooming in on her every movement. It felt invasive, predatory. Amara's stomach turned. This is stalking. They were right there outside her house. How did she not notice? Mike clenched his fists. She didn't stand a chance. This person was obsessed with her. The video continued, the camera getting closer and closer to the window. Then suddenly it cut off. What happened? Lisa asked, her voice filled with dread. Amara clicked on the fourth video. The screen was black for a few seconds before the footage slowly flickered to life. The scene was inside Happiness' house again, but this time she wasn't dancing. She was sitting on her bed, looking uneasy, her eyes darting around the room as if she sensed something was off. She knew, Tara said quietly. She must have felt like she was being watched. Happiness reached for her phone and began typing something, her fingers moving quickly. But before she could finish, a loud bang echoed through the room in the video. Happiness jumped, her phone slipping from her hands. She looked toward the window, her face pale with fear. That's when she knew, Mike said, his voice tight. She realized someone was outside. The video cut off again, leaving them all in suspense. Amara's heart raced as she clicked on the final video, dreading what they were about to see. This time the footage was clear. Happiness was in her room, pacing back and forth, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her breathing was heavy, panicked. She was on the phone with someone, her voice barely audible. She's calling for help, Lisa whispered. The camera angle shifted and then without warning the window shattered. Happiness screamed, backing away as a figure, dressed in all black, climbed through the broken window and into the room. The camera shook as the person approached Happiness, who tried to run but it was too late. The figure grabbed her, covering her mouth to muffle her screams. The room erupted into chaos as Happiness struggled, her phone falling to the ground, still recording the whole horrifying scene. The camera zoomed in on her face, her eyes wide with terror. Then the screen went black. Amara felt like she couldn't breathe. They had just witnessed the moment Happiness was taken. Tara burst into tears while Lisa sat frozen in shock. Mike punched the wall, his face twisted in rage. We need to find this person. Now. Amara's hands were shaking as she stared at the blank screen. This was it. This was the truth they had been searching for. But it was far worse than they could have ever imagined. Whoever M was, they had been watching Happiness for weeks, maybe even months. And now they had taken her. But why? Amara's thoughts raced. There had to be more to this. The videos were just the beginning. M had left this USB drive for a reason. They wanted them to see this. But what was the end game? Suddenly, Amara remembered the cryptic messages. The truth awaits. What if this was just a piece of the puzzle? What if there was more they hadn't uncovered yet? We need to go back to the police, Tara said, her voice shaky. They have to take us seriously now. They won't, Mike said bitterly. Not without something concrete. Amara stared at the USB drive, her mind racing. We have to figure out who M is. There's something we're missing. Mike looked at her, his anger giving way to determination. So what's the next move? Amara thought for a moment, then it hit her. The cryptic messages, they had led them to the quarry, to Happiness, to this USB drive. But there was one more message they hadn't deciphered yet. The final clue. We need to go back to where it all started, Amara said. To Happiness' TikTok account. The group exchanged uneasy glances. What do you mean? Lisa asked. Amara's mind was already racing. There's something in her account that we missed. Something hidden. We need to dig deeper. If we want to find out who M is, that's where we'll find the answers. With renewed determination, the group gathered around the laptop, ready to dive back into Happiness' TikTok, knowing that the answers they sought might be buried in the very platform that had brought their friends so much joy, and now so much pain. Happiness' TikTok account felt like a digital ghost town. As Amara, Lisa, Mike and Tara scrolled through her page, they couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were lurking somewhere in plain sight. The videos, once a vibrant display of dance routines, trending challenges and light-hearted fun, now carried an eerie weight, haunted by the darkness they knew had been watching all along. Start with the comments, Mike suggested, his eyes focused on the screen. Maybe left some clues there. Amara nodded and began scrolling through the comments on Happiness' latest videos. Most of them were from fans expressing their admiration, others asking why she hadn't posted anything new in days. But then, about a week before her disappearance, a strange pattern started to emerge. "Look at this," Amara said, pointing to a series of cryptic comments that had been left on almost every video. Each one was from different accounts, but the messages were oddly similar. "Dance like no one's watching, you're never alone, and sees all." "That's creepy as hell," Lisa said, hugging herself as she leaned closer to the screen. "These are from burner accounts," Mike noted, pointing to the lack of profile pictures and minimal activity on the accounts. "No followers, no other posts. Was using fake profiles to leave these comments. Why didn't we notice this earlier?" Tara muttered, shaking her head. Amara's fingers moved quickly as she clicked on one of the burner profiles. It led to a page with no videos, no bio, and no followers. Just a black background with a single unsettling caption. "The final dance awaits." "This is sick," Amara whispered, goosebumps rising on her skin. Was toying with her. Leaving these comments, watching her every move, knowing she wouldn't suspect anything. Lisa leaned in, her eyes narrowing at the screen. "Wait, go back to that comment. The one about dancing." Amara clicked on the comment, which had been posted just a day before Happiness had vanished. It read, "The last dance is always the hardest. Be ready." "This feels like a countdown," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara's mind raced. If these cryptic comments had been leading up to something, maybe they were missing a key detail. Something more hidden within the account. But what? What if it's not just the comments? Mike said, leaning over Amara's shoulder. What if was using the videos themselves? There could be something in the footage we didn't see before. Amara felt her heart skip a beat. That made sense. If had been leaving clues in the comments, there could be something more in Happiness videos. Without wasting any time, she clicked on the most recent one. The last TikTok Happiness had posted before she went missing. The video started like any other. Happiness smiling, performing one of her favorite dance routines. But now that they knew what had happened, it felt wrong, almost surreal. As she spun and twirled in front of the camera, the same ominous feeling they'd experienced watching the footage from the USB drive returned. "Pause it," Lisa said suddenly, her eyes wide. "Look at the background." Amara froze the video and they all leaned in closer. At first, it seemed normal. Happiness was dancing in her living room, the familiar surroundings of her home in the background. But then they saw it. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, lurking just behind her. The figure was almost hidden by the curtains, but it was there, standing in the corner of the room, watching her. "That's him," Tara whispered, horrified. "That's him. Wait," Amara said, zooming in on the shadow. "It's not just that. Look at the time." They all glanced at the timestamp on the video. Happiness had posted it at exactly 11:11 p.m. The same time had sent the final cryptic message. "The truth awaits at 11:11. "It's all connected," Mike muttered, his voice filled with dread. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. The timestamp, the shadow in the video, the cryptic comments, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Had been in Happiness' house that night, watching her as she danced, waiting for the right moment to strike. But why? What was the significance of 11:11? And how had they all missed these signs before? "There's something we're not seeing," Amara said, her mind racing. "Something we're missing. Why did choose Happiness? What's the connection?" They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the mystery hanging over them like a dark cloud. Then suddenly Lisa gasped, her eyes wide with realization. "The cryptic messages," she said, her voice trembling. "They weren't just clues, they were instructions. Look at the way they're worded. Dance like no one's watching, you're never alone, sees all." It's like was controlling her, manipulating her actions. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. Lisa was right. The messages had been more than just taunts, they were commands. Had been orchestrating everything, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. But why? Mike asked, his frustration growing. What's the endgame here? Amara's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the comments one last time, her mind working overtime to piece everything together. Then she saw it, the final comment, the one they had all missed. It had been left on the very first video Happiness ever posted, months before she'd started gaining popularity. The message was simple, chilling in its brevity. Welcome to the game. The room fell silent as they stared at the screen, the reality of the situation sinking in. This was never about happiness, Amara whispered, her voice filled with horror. It was about control. M was playing a game and happiness was just a pawn. But what kind of game? Tara asked, her voice trembling. Amara shook her head, the pieces of the puzzle finally starting to fall into place. I don't know. But whatever it is, we're next. The group exchanged terrified glances, realizing that M had been watching them too, just like happiness. They were part of the game now, whether they liked it or not. And the final move was yet to be played. The tension in the air was suffocating. Amara's heart pounded against her chest as she tried to make sense of everything they'd uncovered. It was no longer about figuring out what happened to happiness. It was about surviving what came next. We need to go to the police again, Lisa said, her voice trembling. This isn't just a missing person case anymore. This is something much bigger. Amara clenched her fists, frustrated. The police didn't believe us the first time. What makes you think they'll listen now? Mike nodded grimly. They probably still think she ran away. And even if we show them the cryptic messages, they'll just write it off as some online troll. Then what do we do? Tara asked, fear evident in her voice. We can't just sit around and wait for him to come for us. Amara stared at the screen, the final comment still glaring back at her. Welcome to the game. This was personal now. M had orchestrated everything, watching them all along. But why? What did he want from them? And how could they possibly outsmart someone who seemed to be one step ahead at every turn? We need to figure out who M is, Amara said, her voice steely with determination. It's the only way to end this. But how? Mike asked. We've combed through all of Happiness' videos, the comments, the messages. There's nothing else to go on. Amara's mind raced, trying to think of anything they might have missed. Then it hit her. Happiness had a private folder on her phone, something she had mentioned casually in passing but never elaborated on. Amara hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now with everything they knew, it seemed like a clue worth pursuing. Happiness had a private folder on her phone, Amara said. She mentioned it to me once, but I never thought to ask what was inside. If we can access that, maybe we'll find something that can lead us to M. Do you still have her phone? Lisa asked, her eyes wide with hope. Amara nodded. Her mom gave it to me after the police handed it back. I didn't think there was anything useful on it, but I didn't check the private folder. Then we need to get into that folder, Mike said, his voice filled with urgency. That's our next move. The group gathered around as Amara retrieved Happiness' phone from her bag. Her hands shook as she powered it on, the familiar wallpaper of Happiness smiling back at them, blissfully unaware of the dark fate that had befallen her. Navigating through the phone, Amara found the private folder app. It was password protected, of course. Damn it, she muttered. I have no idea what the password could be. Try her birthday, Lisa suggested. Amara typed it in, but the phone buzzed with a rejection. Nope, not it. How about her favorite song? Tara asked. After a few failed attempts, Amara sighed. Nothing seemed to work. We need to think like Happiness. What would she use for something important? They sat in silence for a moment, trying to think. Then Mike spoke up. What about something TikTok related? Like a hashtag she always used. Amara's eyes lit up. Yes. She used hashtag dance with happiness on almost all her posts. She typed in the hashtag holding her breath. The screen flickered for a moment and then, success. The private folder opened, revealing a series of videos, notes and screenshots. The group exchanged tense glances, knowing they were one step closer to the truth. The first video they opened was a simple recording of Happiness practicing one of her dance routines. But something about it felt off. Amara fast-forwarded through the video until she reached the end, where Happiness turned off the music. As she did, her expression changed. She looked over her shoulder as if sensing something behind her. Then out of nowhere she whispered, I know you're there. The video ended abruptly, leaving them all in stunned silence. What the hell? Lisa whispered. She knew someone was watching her. Amara's fingers hovered over the screen as she clicked on another video. This one was different. It was dark, grainy and shaky as if Happiness had recorded it in a hurry. Her face filled the frame, her eyes wide with fear. "If you're seeing this, something has happened to me," Happiness said, her voice trembling. "I've been getting messages, creepy ones, from someone named M. At first I thought it was just a troll, but now I'm scared. They've been following me, watching me, leaving cryptic comments on all my videos. I don't know who they are, but they want something from me." Amara felt a lump form in her throat as she watched her friend's terrified confession. "I don't know what to do," Happiness continued. "I've tried blocking them, reporting them, but they keep coming back. And now I think they're inside my house. I hear noises at night, things moving around, but when I check, no one's there." Happiness looked over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If anything happens to me, check my videos. The answers are there. M is playing a game and I'm the target. But I think it's bigger than just me. Be careful." The video cut off, leaving the group in stunned silence. "She knew," Tara whispered, her voice shaking. "She knew this was going to happen." Amara felt tears welling up in her eyes. "We should have done more. We should have been there for her." Mike placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "This isn't your fault, Amara. None of us knew. But now we do," Amara said, her voice filled with resolve. "And we're going to finish what she started." They went through the remaining files, finding more cryptic notes and screenshots of the creepy comments. But one file stood out, a screenshot of an email from an address that seemed familiar. m@thefanalmov.com. "That's it," Mike said, pointing to the screen. "That's how we find M. Amara nodded, her heart pounding with both fear and determination. They finally had a lead. But what would they do when they found M? And how far would they have to go to end this nightmare? They were about to find out. The gravity of what they had just uncovered weighed heavily on all of them. The cryptic messages, the eerie recordings, and now the email from M. It all pointed to something far more sinister than they could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about Happiness anymore. They were now part of this twisted game, whether they liked it or not. Amara sat back in her chair, staring at the email address. m@thefanalmov.com. The name sent a chill down her spine. What did the final move mean? Was it some kind of sick game M had been playing all along, leading them to this point? And now that they were here, what was the next move? "We need to reply," Mike said, breaking the silence. "Reply?" Tara's voice wavered. "Are you serious? What if it's a trap? What if by responding we're giving Ems exactly what he wants?" Lisa folded her arms, her face pale. "I agree with Tara. It's too dangerous. We're walking into something we don't fully understand." Amara closed her eyes for a moment, thinking through the options. There was no telling what M had planned for them. But ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. Happiness had warned them. She had left clues, breadcrumbs leading them to this moment. They couldn't back down now. "No," Amara said, her voice steady but resolute. "We have to respond. If we don't, M will stay one step ahead of us. But if we engage, we might be able to catch him off guard. But how do we do that?" Tara asked. "It feels like we're playing right into his hands." Amara looked at her friends, determination building inside her. "We play smarter. We don't just reply. We set a trap. M has been playing a game with us from the start. But now we'll turn the tables on him." The room fell silent as everyone processed Amara's plan. He was right. They couldn't sit back and let M dictate the rules anymore. "Okay," Mike said after a pause. "I'm with you. But how do we do it?" Amara thought for a moment, staring at the email address. She typed out a simple response. "Tsigik, game on. We know what you've done. We know who you are. It's time for the final move." Her hands trembled as she hovered over the send button, but she didn't hesitate. She pressed it. The message was sent. They waited in silence, the tension in the room thick. Every second felt like an eternity. But nothing came back. No reply, no immediate response. Had it worked? Was M biding his time? "What now?" Lisa asked, her voice barely a whisper. Amara stared at the screen. "Now we wait. But we don't wait passively. We need to dig deeper into who M is. There's got to be a digital trail. Something we missed." They spent the next hour scouring the internet, looking for any clue that could tie back to the email address. It wasn't easy. M had clearly covered his tracks well. But Mike was persistent. diving into hacker forums and databases most people wouldn't dare visit. Suddenly his eyes widened. "Guys, I think I found something." Everyone rushed over to his side as he pulled up an old forum post from a few years ago. The username was simply M, and the post was chilling. It was a detailed account of a series of online games the user claimed to have played, each one involving a victim who mysteriously disappeared after receiving cryptic messages online. "This has to be him," Mike said, scrolling through the post. "It's the same pattern. The victims all received weird messages just like Happiness. And then they vanished." Amara's stomach churned. It was real. M had done this before. And now he had chosen Happiness as his latest victim. "Look," Tara said, pointing to the bottom of the post. "It says, 'Final move at the chessboard.' What does that mean?" Amara's heart raced as she pieced it together. M is obsessed with games. He's playing chess, but not in the traditional sense. He's been setting up moves all along, leading us to this point. The cryptic messages, the email, everything. It's all part of his sick strategy. Then what's the final move? Lisa asked, her voice shaky. Amara stared at the screen, her mind racing. The final move is us. M wants us to make the wrong move to play into his hands. But we're going to make sure we don't. We'll turn his game against him. Just as she finished speaking, Amara's phone buzzed. She looked down and her breath caught in her throat. There it was, the reply from M. Subject, checkmate. You're clever but not clever enough. Meet me where it all began. The clock is ticking. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. Where it all began, she whispered. What does that mean? Mike's face darkened. Happiness House. That's where it all started. The strange noises, the messages, it all began there. Then that's where we go, Amara said, her voice firm. But what if it's a trap? Tara asked, fear evident in her voice. It is a trap, Amara replied. But it's our only shot at catching him. We have to be ready. They quickly devised a plan. Amara would bring her laptop and keep the group connected through video. If anything went wrong, they would contact the authorities. They would also bring any evidence they had gathered to help build a stronger case. If M thought he had the upper hand, they were determined to prove him wrong. As they prepared to leave, Amara took one last look at the final email. The clock is ticking. She didn't know what M had planned for them, but she wasn't afraid anymore. For happiness' sake and their own, they would see this game through to the end. With that, they headed out, not knowing if they would all make it back. The night was eerily quiet as Amara, Mike, Tara, and Lisa made their way toward Happiness House. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of streetlights, casting long, shadowy fingers across the pavement. There was a palpable tension in the air, and despite their determination, fear lingered in the back of their minds. Amara clutched her laptop bag tightly as they approached the familiar house, now an ominous silhouette against the moonlit sky. The place where Happiness had lived was now a scene of mystery and dread, holding secrets they were desperate to uncover. But none of them could shake the sense of foreboding. As they reached the front gate, Tara hesitated, her fingers trembling as she reached for the latch. Are we really doing this? She asked, her voice barely audible. Amara gave a firm nod. We don't have a choice. This is where M wants us, and this is where we'll find the answers. The gate creaked open, its sound like a warning in the stillness. They stepped inside, the familiar yard now feeling alien and hostile. The house loomed before them, its windows dark and lifeless. The same house that once echoed with Happiness' laughter now stood as a grave reminder of her absence. As they reached the front door, Mike tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge. Locked, he muttered. Amara stepped forward, reaching into her bag for the spare key Happiness had given her months ago when they were still carefree friends, laughing over TikTok videos and dance routines. She hesitated before inserting the key, the weight of what they were about to face hanging over her. The door unlocked and a gust of stale air greeted them as they pushed it open. Inside, the house was pitch black, the familiar furniture now twisted into haunting shapes by the shadows. The silence was deafening, and each step they took seemed to echo endlessly through the rooms. They made their way to the living room, the spot where Happiness had filmed so many of her TikTok videos. Amara glanced around, trying to imagine Happiness dancing here, full of life and energy. It felt impossible now. Where do we even start? Lisa whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. Amara pulled out her laptop and powered it on, setting it on the coffee table. We follow the clues. M said to meet him where it all began, and this is where the strange noises started. Maybe there's something in the house we've missed, something that will lead us to him. Mike knelt beside her, looking through the laptop's files for anything unusual. They combed through video footage, messages and emails, but nothing stood out, until Tara gasped. Look. She pointed to a video file buried deep in the folder. The file was marked with a single letter, M. Amara's heart skipped a beat. Play it. The video flickered to life, showing Happiness sitting in this very room, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. It wasn't one of her usual videos. Her expression was different. Desperate. If you're seeing this, Happiness' voice quivered through the speakers. It means something has happened to me. Tara covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes welling with tears. I don't know how much time I have left. He's watching me, always watching. I tried to stop him, but it's too late. Please, if you're my friends, if you care about me, you have to find him. He's not who you think he is. The video cut out abruptly, static filling the screen. What the hell? Mike whispered, his face pale. Amara's blood ran cold. Happiness had known something was coming for her. She had tried to warn them. But why didn't she tell them sooner? Why didn't she reach out before it was too late? She knew M was dangerous, Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was trying to protect us. But why didn't she leave more clues? Just then a loud noise echoed from the hallway, making them all jump. It was a thud, followed by the creak of floorboards. Someone, or something, was in the house with them. Did you hear that? Lisa's voice trembled as she backed away from the hallway. Amara quickly grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. She motioned for everyone to stay close as she cautiously made her way toward the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. As they turned the corner into the hallway, the light from her phone illuminated something on the floor. A piece of paper. Amara bent down to pick it up, her fingers trembling. On the paper was a single letter, M. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind them. They spun around, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. But there was no one there. Amara, Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. We need to get out of here. Now. Before Amara could respond, her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a text message from an unknown number. You've made your move. Now it's my turn. The clock is ticking. Her blood ran cold. M was watching them right now. We need to leave, Amara said, her voice shaking. He's here. They rushed back to the living room, panic setting in. But as they reached the front door, it slammed shut on its own, the lock clicking into place. They were trapped. Amara frantically tried to unlock it, but the key wouldn't turn. We're locked in, she cried, her heart racing. Suddenly, a deep, distorted voice echoed through the house. It was coming from the laptop. The game isn't over yet. You've made your move. Now it's time for the final move. Will you win or will you lose everything? Tick-tock. Amara's hands shook as she turned to face her friends. We need to stay calm. There has to be a way out of this. We just have to figure it out. The house seemed to close in around them, the walls feeling tighter with each passing second. They knew one thing for sure, and wasn't done with them yet. And the final move had just begun. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every second felt like a countdown to something terrible, yet none of them could place what it was. Amara's hands trembled as she clutched the phone. The cryptic text from M felt like a death sentence. There was no way to know what his next move would be, and the locked door behind them offered no solace. What do we do now? Tara asked, her voice barely concealing her panic. Amara took a deep breath, forcing herself to think clearly. First, we need to figure out how M is watching us. He's been a step ahead this whole time, but we have to stay calm and outthink him. Mike nodded, scanning the room for any signs of surveillance. He's either hacked into our devices or set up cameras in the house. We need to shut down anything that could be broadcasting. Lisa, pale and shivering, added, what if it's more than that? What if he's inside? Somehow. The thought sent a chill down everyone's spine. The idea of M lurking in the shadows, orchestrating their every move, was horrifying. But Amara wasn't ready to give up yet. Let's split up. Mike, you and Lisa check the other rooms for anything suspicious. Tara and I will figure out if he's hacked into the laptop. Reluctantly they agreed, though no one wanted to be separated. With a sense of dread weighing them down, they went their separate ways, careful not to stray too far from one another. Amara returned to the living room with Tara, her eyes fixed on the laptop. She quickly started going through its settings and programs, trying to find any trace of a hack or virus. Tara paced nervously, her arms folded tight against her chest. Why didn't Happiness tell us sooner? Tara muttered, more to herself than anyone else. She was always so strong. Why didn't she ask for help? Amara's fingers froze on the keyboard. That question had been haunting her too. Happiness wasn't the type to hide her fears. At least that's what they thought. Maybe she didn't want to worry us. Or maybe Em made sure she couldn't reach out. We don't know what kind of hold he had on her. But we're her best friends. Tara's voice cracked, tears welling up in her eyes. We should have seen the signs. We should have been there for her. Amara swallowed hard. The guilt was suffocating, but dwelling on what they should have done wouldn't help them now. We're here now, Tara. That's what matters. We're going to figure this out, and we're going to stop Em before anyone else gets hurt. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by a scream. Lisa. Amara and Tara bolted to their feet, racing down the hallway toward the stairs. Lisa. Amara shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. When they reached the top of the stairs, they found Lisa standing in the hallway, her face as pale as a ghost. In front of her, the door to Happiness' bedroom was wide open. What's wrong? Amara asked breathlessly. Lisa pointed a shaky finger into the room. Look. Inside the bedroom there was a mirror, cracked and covered in dust. But that wasn't what made Lisa scream. Scrawled across the glass in red, jagged letters was a chilling message. I am always watching. Em. Amara's stomach dropped. The message felt like a violation, as if Em was in the room with them, taunting them. She stepped closer to the mirror, her eyes scanning the reflection for any hidden clues. Just then Mike rushed in behind them. I heard the scream. What happened? Look, Tara said, pointing to the mirror. Mike's face hardened as he read the words. That sick bastard. He's toying with us. How did he get in here? Lisa asked, her voice shaking. How could he have left this message without us knowing? Amara turned back to the group, her mind racing. We need to stay together from now on. He's clearly been in the house, but we still don't know how. There has to be something we're missing. Suddenly, a realization hit her. She hurried back downstairs to the living room, the others close behind. She grabbed the laptop and pulled up Happiness' last TikTok video. It was just a short clip of her dancing, nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. But Amara knew better now. She rewound the video to the beginning and played it again, this time paying close attention to the background. There, just barely visible in the corner of the screen, was a shadow. A figure standing just outside the frame watching her. Oh my God, Tara whispered, her eyes wide with horror. He was there. The whole time. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Em had been closer to Happiness than they ever realized. He was in her house, possibly even living in her shadow. That's how he's been watching us. He's been here in her house all along. Mike clenched his fists. We have to find him. Now. But just as they began to formulate a plan, the lights in the house flickered, then went out entirely. Darkness enveloped them and the air grew thick with silence. A voice echoed through the room, distorted, cold, and familiar. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock is still ticking. Will you make it out in time? Or will you end up just like her? Amara's heart raced. They were running out of time. And the game was far from over. Amara froze in place, the haunting voice reverberating through the darkness like a sinister melody. Her hands tightened into fists, nails digging into her palms. Mike, Tara, and Lisa stood around her, their faces pale, their breathing heavy. The air felt heavy with fear, a silence stretching too long. Who's there? Mike shouted into the void. His voice echoed back at him unanswered. Amara could feel the tension in the air, an overwhelming sense that they were not alone. Somewhere, lurking in the shadows, Em was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. We need to get out of here, Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. Now. But as she moved towards the door, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed from the hallway, stopping her in her tracks. They weren't alone. The realization hit them all at once, their bodies freezing in a collective grip of terror. Stay close, Mike whispered, grabbing a flashlight from the coffee table. Its beam cut through the suffocating darkness, barely illuminating the room as they huddled together. Amara's mind raced, searching for answers. She knew Em was toying with them, but she had no idea what his endgame was. All she knew was that every second they stayed in the house brought them closer to a fate like happiness. Lisa, trembling, whispered, "But how do we get out? What if he's outside? What if this whole house is a trap?" Amara swallowed hard. It felt like they were caged in with no escape. She looked back at the message in Happiness' cracked mirror. "I am always watching." Those words echoed in her mind, gnawing at her with an unsettling finality. M wasn't just watching them. He was controlling everything. Suddenly, the front door creaked open with an eerie groan. The group exchanged wide-eyed glances. "Did you hear that?" Tara whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Amara nodded, moving cautiously toward the entrance, but just as she reached out to touch the handle, a gust of wind slammed the door shut with a deafening bang. The loud crash sent a wave of terror through the group. Lisa let out a shriek, grabbing onto Mike for support. "We're trapped," she muttered, her voice quivering. But Amara shook her head. "No, we're not giving up. There's something we're missing. We need to figure out how he's controlling everything, how he's always one step ahead." As the group huddled closer, Amara's phone vibrated in her pocket, snapping her out of her panic. She quickly pulled it out and unlocked the screen, hoping for some clue, something to break the suffocating silence. It was another message from, "You're running out of time. TikTok." The next clue is in her last video. "But will you be brave enough to look?" Amara's heart pounded. Another clue. A part of her didn't want to play this sick game, but they had no choice. If they didn't find the next clue, they'd never escape. She quickly pulled up Happiness' last TikTok video again, this time scanning every frame, every shadow. "Look here," she said, pointing at the screen. In the background behind Happiness there's something off. Tara, Lisa, and Mike crowded around, staring intently at the image. It was subtle, but Amara was right. In the background, barely visible through a doorway, there was something dark. A figure lurking in the shadows. Mike squinted. That's her room, isn't it?" Amara nodded slowly. "I think so. But look closer. It's not just a shadow. There's something written on the wall." Lisa gasped as the realization hit her. "What is it? What does it say?" Amara zoomed in on the video, but the words were blurry, obscured by the poor lighting. She could only make out fragments of letters, but they were enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Never from This is his signature," Mike said, his voice dark. "He's been here all along, stalking her, leaving these messages. He's taunting us. But what does he want?" Tara whispered, her voice shaking. "Why Happiness? Why us?" Before anyone could answer, another loud crash came from upstairs. Sounded like something, or someone, had been knocked over. Amara's blood ran cold. "We need to check that out." The group moved hesitantly up the stairs, flashlight in hand. As they approached Happiness' room, they noticed the door was slightly ajar. The inside of the room was dimly lit, casting eerie shadows across the floor. Amara pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking ominously. Inside, the room was in shambles. Drawers overturned, clothes strewn across the floor, and in the center of it all was Happiness' TikTok setup, lights still blinking faintly. But what caught Amara's attention was the mirror. It had shattered completely, leaving only jagged shards of glass around the edges. And on the wall behind the broken mirror was another message, scrawled in the same crimson letters as before. "You can run, but you'll never hide." Mike cursed under his breath, and Lisa started to sob softly. This isn't just a game anymore," she whispered. "He's going to kill us." Amara swallowed, her mind racing. She couldn't give in to the fear. She couldn't let M win. "No, we're going to figure this out. There's something more in here, I know it." She started searching through Happiness things, flipping through notebooks, checking under the bed. Then behind a pile of clothes she found something, a small leather-bound journal. "What's that?" Tara asked. Amara opened it slowly, her hands trembling. Inside were pages of notes, sketches, and writings, all documenting Happiness' growing fear. There were entries about M, about the strange messages she'd been receiving, and her suspicions that someone had been watching her. But what stood out the most was the final entry, hastily written and barely legible. "If something happens to me, find the man in the mask. He knows everything." The man in the mask. Amara's mind raced. It was another cryptic clue, but it was also their first real lead. The man in the mask was connected to M, and he held the key to everything. "We need to find this man," Amara said, determination hardening her voice. "He's the only way we can stop him." The others nodded, though their faces were etched with fear. They had a lead, but the clock was ticking and they were running out of time. And somewhere out in the darkness, M was waiting for them to make their next move. Amara's hands trembled as she clutched Happiness' journal. The mention of the man in the mask brought a fresh wave of dread crashing over her. She tried to keep her mind focused. This was their only lead. But how were they supposed to find someone they didn't even know existed until now? "We have to figure out who this man is," Mike said, his voice grim. "He's got to be linked to M. Maybe he's been hiding in plain sight." Tara stared at the journal as if the answers might magically appear. "But where do we even start? How do we find him?" Amara closed the journal and glanced around Happiness' room, her mind churning. There had to be something here. A clue, a lead, something that could point them in the right direction. She replayed everything in her mind. Happiness' growing fear, the cryptic messages, the stalking presence of M, and now this masked figure. Amara took a deep breath, forcing her thoughts to slow. "The videos," she murmured. "Maybe the answer is in one of Happiness' TikToks." "Another video?" Lisa asked, her voice shaky. "Are you sure?" "It's the only lead we have right now," Amara replied. "Remember, the last clue was in one of her videos. There might be something hidden in another one." Mike nodded. "Let's check her profile again." They gathered around Amara's phone as she opened Happiness' TikTok account once more. Her last few videos were eerie in retrospect, Happiness smiling and dancing, but with a shadow lurking behind her eyes. As they scrolled, one video caught Amara's attention. A video from a few weeks before her disappearance with an unusual thumbnail. It was a typical dancing video, but the background was different. Instead of Happiness' usual bedroom setup, she was filming in what looked like an empty, dimly lit parking lot. Behind her, faint graffiti covered the walls, and something about it made Amara's skin crawl. "Stop," Amara said, her finger hovering over the screen. "Play this one." The group watched in silence as the video started. Happiness danced in the center of the screen, her movements graceful and precise, but the setting was undeniably eerie. In the background, barely visible, was a figure, an outline of a person wearing a dark hoodie and a white mask. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there watching. Mike cursed under his breath. "Is that him?" Amara's pulse quickened. "It has to be. Look at the mask." The man in the background wore a featureless white mask, eerily simple and haunting. He stood motionless in the shadows, his presence unsettling. Happiness seemed unaware of him, dancing without a care in the world, as if she had no idea she was being watched. "This must be the man in the mask," Amara whispered. "But why didn't Happiness mention him before?" Lisa frowned. Maybe she didn't know he was there. Or maybe she thought it was a prank. Or maybe M was controlling him, Tara added softly, her voice filled with fear. What if he's part of M's sick game? Amara felt a chill run down her spine. She replayed the video, pausing on the frame where the masked man stood. Something about him seemed familiar. But no matter how hard she tried to place him, she couldn't. "Do you recognize him?" Mike asked, noticing her hesitation. Amara shook her head slowly. "No, but it feels like I've seen him before." Mike rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Maybe we need to figure out where this was filmed. If we can find the location, we might be able to track him down." Amara nodded in agreement. "Right. There's graffiti on the wall behind her. Maybe it's a landmark, something we can use to find the place." They zoomed in on the video, scrutinizing the graffiti. It was a strange, chaotic mix of symbols and words, but one phrase stood out, spray-painted in bright red letters near the bottom of the wall. "The Watcher sees all." Lisa gasped. That has to be connected to him." Amara felt her stomach drop. The phrase was unnerving, and the fact that it appeared in a random parking lot only made things worse. The Watcher. Was that another name for him? Or was it someone else, someone who had been watching Happiness from the shadows? "We need to find this place," Mike said firmly. "It's our only shot at finding out who this guy is." Amara glanced at the clock. It was nearing midnight, but they couldn't afford to wait. Every second they delayed gave M more time to tighten his grip on them. "Let's go," Amara said, her voice filled with determination. They quickly gathered their things and headed for the door, their hearts pounding with fear and anticipation. The night outside was cold and unforgiving, the air thick with the promise of danger. Amara felt a surge of anxiety as they stepped into the darkness, but she pushed it down, focusing on the task ahead. Using landmarks from the video, they traced Happiness' steps, driving through the darkened streets until they found the parking lot. It was just as desolate and eerie as it had looked in the video. The graffiti-covered walls loomed over them, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. Amara's flashlight flickered as they stepped out of the car, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. They approached the spot where Happiness had filmed her video, the red letters of "The Watcher Sees All" staring back at them like a warning. "Look around," Amara said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "He has to be here somewhere." The group spread out, searching the area. The parking lot was silent, the only sound being their footsteps on the cracked pavement. But then from the shadows, a figure emerged, slowly, deliberately, as if he had been waiting for them all along. It was the man in the mask. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as the masked figure stepped closer, his face expressionless behind the white mask. He said nothing, just stood there watching them with an unnerving stillness. "Who are you?" Mike demanded, stepping forward, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "What do you want?" The masked man tilted his head slightly as if considering the question. Then in a low, raspy voice he finally spoke. "I am the one who sees all. And I've been waiting for you." Amara's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Happiness anymore. This was something bigger, something darker. And now they were right in the middle of it. The man in the mask took a step closer, his presence suffocating. "You're too late," he whispered. "The game has already begun." Amara's mind raced. They were running out of time, faster than they realized. The air in the parking lot was suffocating, thick with tension as the man in the mask slowly approached. His movements were measured, almost rehearsed, as if every step was part of some elaborate plan. Amara, Mike, Lisa, and Tara stood frozen, their fear palpable in the eerie silence. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she locked eyes with the mask's cold, featureless face. Who was this man? Why had Happiness never mentioned him? And what kind of twisted game was he playing? "I don't understand," Amara stammered, her voice shaking. "What do you mean the game has begun?" The man in the mask remained silent for a moment, his head tilting slightly as if savoring their confusion. Then he took another step forward, his voice low and raspy. "It started the moment you opened her journal. You've been playing all along." Amara's mind raced. The journal, Happiness' diary, had revealed so many dark secrets, but could it have also been a trap? Was this man behind the cryptic messages from M? And if so, how long had he been manipulating them from the shadows? "Who are you?" Mike demanded, stepping protectively in front of the group. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from us?" The masked man let out a slow, chilling laugh. "You already know who I am," he replied. "I've been watching you all for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. And now you've come right to me." Amara's pulse quickened as she glanced around the parking lot. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the city. She felt trapped, like they were mice caught in a maze designed by this sadistic figure. "What do you mean?" Tara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you watching us?" The masked man took another step forward, his presence dominating the space. "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go for her," he said, his voice filled with dark amusement. "How far you'd chase the clues. How deep you'd dig into her life. And now that you're here, I have to say I'm impressed." Amara clenched her fists, anger boiling beneath her fear. This man, this monster, had been toying with them, watching their every move. And for what? A sick game to see how long they could last. "We're done playing your game," Amara said, her voice filled with determination. "Tell us what happened to Happiness. Where is she?" The man in the mask didn't respond immediately. Instead he took his time, as if savoring the moment. Finally he leaned forward, his masked face inches from Amara's. "She's gone," he whispered. "She was always going to be gone." Lisa let out a soft gasp, her eyes filling with tears. "Gone? What do you mean gone? Is she dead?" The masked man straightened, his head tilting slightly as if considering the question. "Dead," he mused. "Well, that depends on how you define it. Her body is gone, yes. But her spirit? Her energy? That's something that lingers." Amara's stomach churned. The way he spoke was so detached, so casual, as if he had no regard for the life he had stolen. But something in his words didn't sit right with her. There was more to this. Something he wasn't telling them. "What did you do to her?" Mike demanded, stepping forward angrily. "Where's her body?" The masked man didn't flinch. Instead he let out another low chuckle. "You'll find out soon enough. But I wouldn't focus on that too much right now. You should be more concerned about yourselves." Amara's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about happiness anymore. They were in danger, real immediate danger. The man in the mask wasn't here to give them answers. He was here to ensure they never made it out of this parking lot. "We need to go," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible to the others. "Now." But as they slowly backed away, the masked man raised a gloved hand. "Oh no," he said softly, his voice filled with malicious glee. "The game's just getting started." Before anyone could react, the sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows. Amara's heart sank as more figures emerged from the darkness. Men dressed in dark clothing, all wearing the same featureless white masks. There were at least 5 of them circling the group, trapping them in the center of the parking lot. Tara let out a whimper, her eyes wide with terror. "What are we going to do?" Amara's mind raced. There was no way out, they were surrounded. And with the cryptic clues and eerie warnings, she couldn't shake the feeling that the masked man had been planning this moment all along. "Stay calm," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. "We'll figure something out." The masked man stepped forward, his presence towering over them. "There's no escape," he said coldly. "You're in my world now. And in my world, there are no winners." Amara clenched her fists, fighting back the rising panic. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. Not now. Not when they were so close to the truth. But as the masked figures closed in, she realized that the man's game wasn't about finding happiness. It was about breaking them. Mentally, emotionally, physically. The man in the mask took one final step forward, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "Now let's see how far you're willing to go to survive." Amara's breath hitched. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a fight for their lives. And the real horror had only just begun. Amara's pulse raced as the masked figures closed in, their slow, calculated steps echoing off the cold pavement. The oppressive silence of the parking lot was now broken only by the rhythmic crunch of gravel under their feet. The others, Mike, Lisa, and Tara, stood frozen, eyes darting frantically between the advancing figures. "Stay close to me," Mike whispered, his voice barely audible over the suffocating tension. He reached for Amara's hand, gripping it tightly, his palm clammy with fear. The man in the white mask stood in the center, watching them with the unnerving stillness of a predator playing with its prey. The faint light from the street lamp flickered, casting eerie shadows across his blank face. "I warned you," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "You've crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. Now you'll see what lies beyond." Amara's mind raced, trying to piece together the cryptic clues they had found so far. Happiness TikTok followers had sent messages, worried about her absence. She had gone silent for days, something completely out of character for the vibrant, always online dancer. But it wasn't just her TikToks that had vanished. Her whole existence seemed to have been erased in the blink of an eye. Her friends had reached out, but Happiness' mother had remained silent, refusing to involve the police. That part still gnawed at Amara. Why hadn't her mother sounded the alarm? "You're sick," Lisa spat, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You killed her, didn't you? You've been playing games with us this whole time." The man in the mask tilted his head slightly, his movements almost robotic. "Killed her," he repeated, a mocking lilt in his voice. "Happiness was special. Her death was not so simple. But you'll find that out soon enough." Amara's mind flashed back to the cryptic messages they had uncovered on Happiness' TikTok account. At first it had been random comments, followers asking why she hadn't gone live or posted any new dance videos. But as the days passed, the messages became more frantic, more unsettling. Someone named M had left bizarre comments that felt like clues, strange riddles hidden between lines of mundane chatter. Amara had thought it was just some obsessed fan at first, but now, seeing this man in front of them, she wondered if it had all been orchestrated from the beginning. "What do you want from us?" Tara's voice was barely above a whisper, her usual bravado crumbling in the face of this terrifying reality. The masked man paused, and for a moment the silence hung thick in the air. "What I want," he said slowly, "is for you to understand. This isn't just about happiness. It never was. She was a catalyst. A spark in a much larger fire. And now you're all part of it." Amara's chest tightened. A catalyst? What could that mean? Happiness was just a TikToker, a dancer who loved to share her life online. She had no enemies, no dangerous secrets, or so they had thought. But now nothing made sense. Was there more to happiness than they had known? The masked figures began to circle, cutting off any chance of escape. Amara's mind raced. They had to find a way out. They couldn't let this psychopath trap them here. But the cryptic messages from M flashed in her mind again. The letters they had found hidden in Happiness Journal, the clues that had led them here, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle they hadn't yet solved. And then it hit her. The journal. The pages Happiness had scribbled on just days before her disappearance had been filled with fragmented thoughts, broken sentences and strange symbols. Amara had thought it was just the ramblings of someone under stress, but now she realized, those weren't random symbols. They were codes. "We need to get to the journal," Amara whispered urgently to Mike. "There's something we missed. I think it holds the key to this whole thing." Mike's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The symbols," she replied, her voice quickening. "The ones in Happiness Journal, they weren't random. They're a code. And I think it's connected to this M person." But the masked man had heard her. His cold, hollow laugh sent a chill down Amara's spine. "Ah, you think you're clever, don't you? But it's too late. The journal was your invitation into this game. There's no turning back now." Amara's heart sank. Was he right? Had they already fallen too deep into this twisted trap? But she couldn't give up. She couldn't let Happiness' memory fade into darkness without finding out what had really happened to her. Suddenly, one of the masked figures lunged forward, grabbing Tara by the arm. She let out a scream, struggling against the figure's grip. "Let her go," Mike shouted, rushing toward them, but two other masked men quickly closed in, blocking his path. Lisa stepped forward, her fists clenched. "You want us to play your sick game? Fine. But we're not going down without a fight." The masked man chuckled again, a sound that sent a wave of dread washing over them. "Good," he said softly. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And with that, the parking lot descended into chaos. Amara ducked as one of the figures lunged toward her, narrowly avoiding their grasp. She grabbed Lisa's arm and pulled her back, their eyes meeting in a silent agreement. They had to stick together if they were going to make it out of this alive. As the masked figures closed in, Amara's mind spun, desperately searching for a way out. The cryptic messages, the journal, the clues, they had to mean something. But as the shadowy figures tightened their grip, she realized that the answers they were seeking might come at a cost greater than they had ever imagined. And as the night grew darker, they were about to find out just how high the stakes really were. Amara's pulse raced as the chaos erupted around them. The masked figures moved with unnerving precision, closing in from every side. Tara's scream pierced the air as she struggled against the grip of the figure who had seized her, their hand like a vice around her arm. Lisa's fierce defiance was met with a cold chuckle from the man in the white mask, who seemed to revel in their fear. Mike, filled with a surge of adrenaline, lunged forward, determined to pry Tara from the masked figure's hold. But before he could make contact, one of the other figures stepped in, delivering a sharp blow to Mike's chest. He staggered back, clutching his ribs, gasping for air. "Stop it!" Amara cried, panic rising in her throat as she watched her friends struggle against their captors. She knew they were outnumbered and there was no way they could fight their way out of this. But what choice did they have? They couldn't just surrender. The man in the white mask stepped forward, his eerie stillness contrasting with the violence unfolding around him. "I warned you," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the noise. "You've crossed into a world you can't comprehend. There's no escaping it now." Amara's mind raced, trying to find a way out. The journal, the symbols, there had to be something in it that could help them. But there was no time to think. The figures were closing in and they were running out of options. Suddenly, a deafening sound echoed through the parking lot. A sharp, high-pitched screech that made everyone freeze in place. The masked figures stopped in their tracks, their heads snapping toward the source of the noise. Amara turned to see the headlights of a car speeding toward them, the engine roaring as it tore across the gravel. The driver honked the horn again and the masked figures scattered, momentarily thrown off balance. "Run!" Mike shouted, taking advantage of the distraction. He grabbed Tara's hand and pulled her free from the figure's grasp, sprinting toward the car. Amara and Lisa followed close behind, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they reached the car, the doors flew open and they piled inside, barely taking a second to catch their breath. The driver, a woman with wild, panicked eyes, shouted, "Get in. Now." Without hesitation, they slammed the doors shut, and the car sped off into the night, leaving the masked figures standing in the glow of the street lamp, watching them disappear into the distance. The car raced down the deserted streets, the tension inside thick enough to cut with a knife. Amara glanced at the driver, her heart still hammering in her chest. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaky. The woman glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. "I'm someone who's been where you are," she replied cryptically. "I know what you're up against." Amara's mind reeled. "What do you mean? Do you know what happened to Happiness?" The woman nodded grimly. "I do. And if you don't start listening to me, the same thing's going to happen to you." Tara, still trembling from the encounter, leaned forward. "What are you talking about? Who are those people? And what do they want from us?" The woman's eyes flicked between the road and the rearview mirror. "They're part of something much bigger than you realize. That man in the white mask? He's not just playing games. He's part of a group that controls things you don't want to know about." Amar's heart sank. "What kind of things?" The woman hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Rituals. Sacrifices. They take people like your friend Happiness and use them for purposes you can't imagine. She was chosen, and now that you've been investigating, they've set their sights on you." A cold dread settled over Amara. "But why? Why Happiness? What does she have to do with any of this?" The woman let out a bitter laugh. "It's not about her. It's about what she represents. People like her, people with a following with influence, they're valuable. The group uses them to spread their message, to grow their power. And once they're done with them," her voice trailed off, the implication clear. Amara's blood ran cold. This was worse than she had imagined. Happiness hadn't just been targeted at random. She had been chosen for a reason. And now they were caught in the middle of it. As the car sped through the dark streets, Amara's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The journal, the symbols, they had to be connected to this group somehow. If they could decode the messages Happiness had left behind, maybe they could find a way to stop them. "We have to go back," Amara said suddenly, her voice firm. The woman glanced at her, startled. "What? Are you insane? You barely made it out alive." "I know," Amara replied, her eyes hard. "But there's something in Happiness' journal. Something we missed. I think it's a code, and it might be the key to all of this." Mike looked at her in disbelief. "Amara, we almost died back there. We can't go back." "We don't have a choice," Amara shot back. "If we don't figure this out, we're going to be hunted down just like Happiness was. And I'm not letting that happen." The woman sighed, shaking her head. "If you really want to go back, I'll take you. But you need to know, you're walking into something you can't walk out of." Amara met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "I understand. But I'm not going to sit by and let them win." The woman didn't argue. She turned the car around, heading back toward the place they had barely escaped from. As they approached the parking lot, Amara's heart pounded in her chest. The masked figures were gone, but the eerie silence still hung in the air. They stepped out of the car, and Amara led the group toward the abandoned building where they had found the journal. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay, the remnants of a life left behind. Amara's hands shook as she opened the journal, flipping through the pages until she found the strange symbols again. "This is it," she whispered, her eyes scanning the cryptic markings. "We need to figure out what this means." Lisa knelt beside her, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It looks like a cipher," she murmured. "But I've never seen anything like it before." Mike glanced around nervously. "We need to hurry. I don't think we're alone." As they worked to decipher the code, a cold wind blew through the room, and the hair on the back of Amara's neck stood on end. She could feel it, the presence of something dark, something watching. Time was running out. Amara's fingers trembled as she continued flipping through the pages of Happiness' journal. The cryptic symbols, once meaningless scribbles, now felt like a language waiting to be unlocked. The weight of the cold wind brushing through the broken windows amplified her sense of urgency. Each passing second felt like a ticking bomb, a countdown to something they couldn't see but could feel, looming in the shadows. Lisa leaned over the pages, her eyes scanning each one. It's a substitution cipher. Look, she pointed at a few repeating symbols. These are letters, probably vowels. It's like a puzzle, but it'll take time. We don't have time, Mike said, casting nervous glances toward the darkened corners of the room. What if they come back? They will come back, the mysterious woman replied from the doorway. They always do. Amara ignored the rising panic in her chest and focused on the journal. It's connected to the comments from M. They have to be. Those riddles. They weren't just clues. They were instructions. She quickly pulled out her phone, scrolling through the screenshots they had taken of the bizarre messages. The mirror reveals what the eyes cannot. That was one of them. It has to be tied to the symbols. Suddenly the wind grew stronger, rattling the old building. Tara flinched, backing away from the window. I have a bad feeling about this. Amara shot her a glance. We need to break the code. It's the only way we'll understand what really happened to Happiness. If she left this behind, it's because she wanted us to find something. Mike's patience was wearing thin. What if she didn't want us to find anything? What if this is just part of their trap? The woman in the doorway, who had been quiet for a moment, finally spoke. It's both. You were never supposed to make it this far. But now that you have, they'll stop at nothing to erase you, just like they did with Happiness. The chill in the air intensified. Amara looked up at her. You keep saying they. Who are they? The woman hesitated before answering, her voice low. They call themselves the Circle of Abyss. They're more than just a group. They're an ancient order, existing in the shadows, feeding off the energy of people like Happiness. She was chosen because of her influence, her connection with the world. The more people who see, the more power the circle gains. The masked men? They're just the enforcers. Amara's heart sank. The cryptic symbols, the masked figures, the circle. It was all part of something much darker and more complex than she had imagined. And what about M? Who is that? The woman's face darkened. M isn't a who. So what? It's the leader, the force behind everything. The one that pulls the strings. Suddenly, Lisa gasped, her eyes widening as she stared at the journal. I think I've got it. She scrambled to show the others. Look, the symbols are numbers tied to letters. It's a key. If we line them up with the messages from M, it creates a pattern. Amara's pulse quickened. What does it say? Lisa worked quickly, her fingers moving furiously over the journal and the messages on Amara's phone. After a tense moment, she looked up, her face pale. It's coordinates. Coordinates to where? Mike asked, but deep down they all knew. It's the abyss, Amara whispered, realization dawning on her. It's where they took Happiness. The woman in the doorway gave a grim nod. And if you go there, you might not come back. But before Amara could respond, a loud creak echoed through the room and the air grew still. Then a slow, deliberate knock came from the door. They weren't alone anymore. The knock sent a wave of terror through the group. It was deliberate, slow, and methodical. Amara's heart raced as her eyes darted toward the door. The shadows outside seemed to shift as if something, or someone, was lurking just beyond their sight. Mike stepped in front of the others, trying to shield them from whatever was coming. We need to get out of here, now, he whispered, but his voice was laced with panic. The woman in the doorway shook her head, her expression grim. It's too late. They know you've cracked the code. Now the real hunt begins. Before anyone could react, the door burst open, slamming against the wall with a deafening crash. The masked figures flooded in, their footsteps eerily quiet as they surrounded the group once again. The man in the white mask stood at the front, his presence radiating control and malice. You thought you could outsmart us? His voice was calm, almost amused. The game is over. Now you face the consequences. Amara felt a surge of cold fear, but something inside her refused to back down. She clutched the journal tightly in her hands. We know about the circle. We know what you did to Happiness. The man in the white mask tilted his head, the dim light casting an eerie glow on his blank face. You know nothing. Happiness was just the beginning. You've seen only a glimpse of the abyss. The masked figures moved closer, their hands outstretched, ready to drag them into the darkness. Amara's breath caught in her throat as the reality of their situation crashed down on her. They were trapped. But just as the figures reached them, the woman who had saved them earlier stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding. I won't let you take them. The masked man laughed, but there was a dangerous edge to his amusement. You can't stop us. With a swift, sudden movement, the woman pulled something from her coat, a small, glowing stone. The air seemed to shift, vibrating with energy as she held it up. The masked figures hesitated, their steps faltering. You forgot, she said, her voice steady. I was part of this before you. The man in the white mask's amusement vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating silence. You betrayed the circle, he said, his voice filled with contempt. And now you think you can stop us with that relic? Amara's mind spun as she watched the exchange. This woman, whoever she was their last hope. The masked man took a step forward, his gaze locked on the glowing stone. You're a fool if you think that can protect them. The woman didn't waver. It's not for protection, she said softly, her voice laced with power. It's to end this. And with that she crushed the stone in her hand, unleashing a blinding light that swallowed the room whole. Amara's world exploded in brightness. The searing light filled every corner of the room, banishing the shadows, and for a brief, breathless moment she thought they had won. The masked figures reeled back, their dark forms retreating, and the suffocating weight that had hung in the air lifted. But then just as quickly as it had come, the light began to fade. As the last tendrils of brightness dissipated, Amara's vision adjusted to the dim surroundings. The masked men were gone, but the room felt different. Darker. The woman stood in the center, her shoulders slumped, the remnants of the stone glowing faintly in her hand. What did you do? Tara asked, her voice trembling. The woman looked up, her eyes haunted. I bought you time. But we're not safe yet. They'll be back. Amara's heart sank. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as the faint glow from the crushed stone flickered and died, plunging the room back into near darkness. The brief victory they had felt was gone, replaced by a suffocating dread. The woman's words hung in the air, they'll be back, and Amara knew that their time was running out. Mike grabbed Amara's arm, pulling her toward the exit. We have to go. Now. The group moved quickly, stepping over the debris that littered the abandoned building. The walls seemed to close in around them, the darkness pressing at their backs like an unseen force, pushing them toward the inevitable. Amara could barely think, her mind racing with fragments of clues, cryptic messages, and the chilling image of the masked man's expressionless face. Lisa walked beside her, clutching the journal tightly. Amara, the coordinates, what if they're not just a location? What if they're something more? Amara glanced at Lisa, her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I don't know, it just feels like everything's pointing us somewhere, not just physically but mentally, emotionally. It's like they're trying to break us down before we even get there. Amara shivered at the thought. Lisa wasn't wrong. Everything about this twisted game felt like a test, a series of psychological traps designed to wear them down. But they couldn't stop now. They were too close to the truth. The woman led them down a narrow staircase that creaked under their weight, her steps confident despite the overwhelming tension in the air. We have to reach the abyss before they can regroup, she said, her voice low and urgent. The abyss isn't just a place. It's a passage, a way in and out of their world. And once you're inside, it's nearly impossible to come back. Amara's stomach turned. What happens if we can't get back? The woman stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned to face them, her eyes heavy with the weight of what she was about to say. Then you become one of them. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Tara's face paled and Mike tightened his grip on Amara's hand. But despite the fear that gripped them, Amara felt a spark of determination flare within her. They had come too far to turn back now. Let's keep moving, Amara said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. We need to figure out what happened to happiness. The woman nodded and led them through a narrow hallway that opened into a cavernous room. At the far end of the room was a large metal door, rusted and ancient. The door was adorned with strange symbols that Amara recognized from Happiness Journal. This is it, the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. Beyond this door lies the abyss. Lisa stepped forward, her hands trembling as she opened the journal and compared the symbols on the door to those in the book. The coordinates. They lead here. This is where it all started. Amara stared at the door, her mind racing. The cryptic messages, the riddles, the journal, it had all led to this moment. But even as they stood on the precipice of the truth, a new fear crept into her heart. What if they weren't ready for what lay beyond that door? The woman approached the door, her hand hovering over the ancient handle. Once we go through, there's no turning back. The abyss will show you things you aren't prepared to see. You'll face your worst fears. And if you aren't strong enough, it will consume you. Amara exchanged a glance with Mike, Lisa, and Tara. They were all terrified, but there was no choice. They had to know what happened to happiness. They had to stop the circle before more lives were taken. With a deep breath, Amara nodded. We're ready. The woman gripped the handle and with a heavy creak, pulled the door open. A cold, dark wind rushed out, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else. Something far worse. Beyond the door was a long, winding tunnel that disappeared into the shadows. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, as if the very walls were alive and waiting for them. As they stepped through the threshold, the darkness swallowed them whole, and Amara knew there was no going back. They were in the abyss now. The tunnel seemed endless, its walls pulsating with a dark energy that felt like it was watching them. Amara's every step felt heavier, as though the air itself was weighing her down. The cold, damp air clung to her skin, making it difficult to breathe. I don't like this, Tara whispered, her voice barely audible over the eerie silence. No one likes it, Mike replied grimly, his eyes darting around the tunnel. But we have to keep going. As they ventured deeper into the abyss, the walls began to change. Strange, glowing symbols lined the tunnel, the same symbols from Happiness Journal. They seemed to move and writhe as though alive. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. Lisa stopped suddenly, her eyes wide. Did you hear that? Amara strained her ears, listening. At first there was nothing but the faint hum of the tunnel's energy. But then she heard it, whispers. Low, unintelligible voices, echoing through the darkness. Who's there? Amara called out, her voice shaking. The whispers grew louder, surrounding them, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. Amara's heart pounded as the voices became clearer, more distinct. It's them, the woman whispered. The ones who were lost to the abyss. Amara's blood ran cold. The voices, they weren't just whispers. They were warnings, cries of those who had entered the abyss and never returned. She could hear their fear, their pain, their regret. It was suffocating. We have to keep moving, the woman urged, her voice firm. Don't listen to them. They'll try to break you. Amara forced herself to keep walking, but the voices only grew louder. They called out her name, accusing her, taunting her with her worst fears. She could hear Happiness' voice among them, pleading for help. Amara, the voice whispered, hauntingly familiar. You let me die. Tears pricked at Amara's eyes. No, I didn't. I didn't know. The woman grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. It's not real. Don't let the abyss take you. Amara stumbled, her mind reeling. The darkness seemed to close in on her, the walls of the tunnel pressing in, suffocating her. She could barely think, barely breathe. The voices were relentless. But then, just as she felt herself slipping into despair, Lisa's voice broke through the chaos. Amara. Look. Amara blinked, her vision clearing just enough to see it. A faint light at the end of the tunnel. It was small, barely visible, but it was there. A beacon in the darkness. We're almost there, the woman said, her voice urgent. You have to fight. Don't let the abyss consume you. Amara nodded, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. Together they pushed forward, their eyes locked on the distant light. The voices continued to claw at them, but Amara focused on that small, flickering beacon. It was their only way out. As they reached the end of the tunnel, the light grew brighter, enveloping them in a warm glow. The oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time since they had entered the abyss, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. But just as they stepped into the light, the ground beneath them gave way, and they were plunged into a new darkness. A deeper, more terrifying void. The abyss had only just begun. Amara screamed as the ground collapsed beneath her, sending her plummeting into an inky black void. The sensation of free-falling was terrifying, her body twisting and turning, her heart racing as she fought to find her balance in the dark abyss. She couldn't see Mike, Lisa, Tara, or the woman, but their terrified cries echoed around her, lost in the swirling shadows. Her hands flailed in the air, searching for something, anything to grab onto, but there was nothing. Just endless darkness. Her mind reeled, panic seizing her when suddenly she hit something solid with a bone-rattling thud. The wind was knocked out of her and for a moment she lay motionless, gasping for air, her limbs aching from the impact. Slowly her vision cleared and she realized she was lying on a hard, cold stone floor. The darkness pressed in around her, thick and suffocating, but there was a faint glow in the distance. Amara groaned, pushing herself up to her knees. Her whole body ached, but she forced herself to move, crawling toward the dim light. "Mike? Lisa? Tara," she called out, her voice hoarse. There was no response, just the eerie silence of the abyss. Her heart sank. She was alone. The fear of being separated from her friends gnawed at her, but she couldn't give up. She had to find them. She had to find happiness. The light grew brighter as she approached, revealing a massive stone archway carved into the cavern wall. Strange symbols, glowing with an eerie green light, were etched into the stone. They were the same symbols she had seen throughout their journey, symbols that haunted her nightmares. Amara hesitated at the entrance, her hand hovering over the cold stone. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to escape while she still could, but she knew there was no turning back now. The truth was behind this door waiting for her, waiting to be revealed. With a deep breath, she stepped through the archway. On the other side, the chamber opened into a vast underground hall. The ceiling was impossibly high, and the walls were lined with massive, grotesque statues, twisted in human figures frozen in anguished poses. At the far end of the hall stood a large stone altar, and above it, a glowing orb pulsed with dark energy. Amara's breath caught in her throat. The orb, it was the same one from Happiness' final TikTok video. The same one she had seen in her visions. "Happiness," Amara whispered, her heart pounding. "You're here." A shadow moved at the edge of her vision and she spun around, her heart racing. But it wasn't a shadow. It was a figure emerging from the darkness. Amara's blood ran cold as she recognized the masked man. The same man who had haunted her since the beginning of this nightmare. "You've come," the masked man said, his voice deep and menacing. "Just as I knew you would." Amara took a step back, her eyes darting around the hall, searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. She was trapped. The masked man moved closer, his footsteps echoing through the chamber. "You've been chasing the truth, Amara. But are you ready to face it?" Amara's mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" The man chuckled darkly, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "You've seen the clues. The messages. You know who I am. Who we are." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She had pieced together fragments of the truth, but the full picture was still just out of reach. "You're part of the circle," she said, her voice trembling. "You've been manipulating everything. Happiness, the videos, the messages. All of it." The man nodded slowly. "Yes. But you still don't understand, do you? This isn't just about control. This is about power. Power that you can't even begin to comprehend." Amara's mind raced. "Where is happiness? What did you do to her?" The man's eyes gleamed behind the mask. "Happiness made a choice. She wanted fame, power, and influence just like you. And she found it, in the abyss." Amara's stomach turned. "What does that mean?" The man stepped closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "Happiness is here. She's part of this now. She became the abyss. And soon so will you." Amara stumbled back, horror washing over her. No, that can't be true." The man spread his arms wide, gesturing to the glowing orb above the altar. "It is. This place, it's not just a portal. It's a nexus, a source of unimaginable power. Happiness tapped into it and now she controls it. But she's not alone. The abyss demands sacrifice. And you, Amara, are the final piece." Amara's heart raced as the truth finally hit her. This was never just about finding happiness. It was about becoming her. The circle had lured them all here, manipulating them, trapping them in this twisted game. And now they wanted to consume her just like they had consumed happiness. "No," Amara whispered, her voice shaking. "I won't let you do this." The man's smile twisted into something dark and cruel. "You don't have a choice." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath her feet, and the glowing orb pulsed with a violent energy. The statues lining the walls began to move, their stone bodies cracking and shifting as they came to life. Amara's heart pounded as the statues' hollow eyes locked onto her, their mouths opening in silent screams. She had to get out. She had to escape before it was too late. Without thinking, Amara turned and ran toward the archway, her legs burning with effort. But the statues were faster. They surged forward, their stone arms reaching for her, their movements impossibly fluid for beings made of stone. Just as one of the statue's hands closed around her arm, a bright flash of light filled the hall, and a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. Amara's vision blurred and she fell to the ground, gasping for breath. When the light faded, she realized the statues had stopped moving. They were frozen once more, their hollow eyes staring blankly ahead. Amara looked up, her chest heaving. Standing in the center of the hall was Lisa, clutching the journal, her eyes wide with fear and determination. Behind her stood Mike and Tara, both bruised and bloodied but alive. "We're not letting you do this alone," Lisa said, her voice shaking but strong. The masked man snarled, his eyes narrowing in rage. "You fools! You don't understand the power you're meddling with." But Amara wasn't listening. Her friends were here. They had a chance. Together, Amara whispered, "We can end this." With renewed strength, she rose to her feet, her eyes locking onto the glowing orb above the altar. It was the key, the source of the abyss power. And they were going to destroy it. The cavern's oppressive silence was broken only by the frantic rhythm of Amara's heartbeat. The room's temperature seemed to drop, as if the orb itself was absorbing every ounce of warmth. The massive chamber, once a site of unimaginable darkness, now lay shrouded in an eerie, unnatural twilight. Shadows danced along the walls, twisted and grotesque, as the friends faced the heart of the abyss. Amara, Lisa, Mike and Tara stood around the altar, their breaths visible in the chilled air. The orb, an otherworldly sphere pulsating with an unsettling green light, sat atop the stone pedestal. Its energy was palpable, a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. The masked man stood some distance away, watching them with an unreadable expression. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos of the situation. His silence spoke volumes, revealing an unsettling confidence. Why wasn't he intervening? What was he planning? The friends exchanged uneasy glances. Amara knew that the orb was their only chance to end the nightmare that had consumed their lives. The journal's cryptic messages had led them here, and it was up to them to decipher the final clues and put an end to the abyss's reign. Lisa, her hands trembling slightly, opened the journal and began to read the incantation aloud. The ancient script glowed faintly as she recited the words, each syllable resonating with a strange, harmonic frequency. The symbols on the walls began to react, their patterns shifting and glowing in response to Lisa's voice. The orb's pulsations grew more erratic, its light intensifying. Mike positioned himself next to the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the orb. The energy from the sphere was nearly overwhelming, a storm of power that made his skin prickle. He reached out, feeling the warmth radiating from the orb. It was as though it were alive, its energy pulsating in rhythm with his own heartbeat. Tara stood at the edge of the chamber, keeping an eye on the masked man and the statues. The ancient figures had begun to stir, their stone limbs moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. Their eyes glowed with a faint green light as if drawn to the orb's power. The masked man's silence was finally broken by a soft, sinister laugh. "You think you can break the orb?" he taunted, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It was never meant to be destroyed. It is a conduit to forces beyond your comprehension." Despite his words, the man did not move to stop them. His inaction was both chilling and perplexing. Was he overconfident, or was there something more sinister at play? Amara shook off her confusion and focused on the task at hand. "We have to channel our energy into the orb," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "The ritual requires our combined strength." Lisa, Mike, Tara and Amara formed a tight circle around the pedestal. They closed their eyes and began to concentrate, focusing their thoughts and emotions on the orb. The energy in the chamber swirled around them, a maelstrom of raw power that seemed to bend to their will. As they concentrated, the orb's light flickered and shifted. The green glow became more erratic, its pulses growing stronger and more chaotic. The chamber filled with a low, rumbling sound like distant thunder. The statues continued to advance, their movements growing more aggressive, but the friends' focus was unwavering. Lisa's voice wavered but remained strong as she chanted the incantation. The ancient symbols on the walls flared with a blinding light, their energy converging on the orb. The sphere trembled, its surface crackling with energy as if it were struggling against their combined force. Suddenly the orb began to convulse, its light exploding in a brilliant flash. The chamber was bathed in a searing brilliance, a blinding white that pushed back the encroaching shadows. The ground shook and the pedestal cracked under the immense pressure. The statues faltered, their movements becoming erratic as the orb's power waned. The masked man's face was a mask of fury, his eyes wide with disbelief. He finally moved, rushing toward the altar, but it was too late. The orb's energy reached a critical point. With a deafening roar, the orb shattered. The explosion was cataclysmic, sending shards of crystal and fragments of green light scattering through the chamber. The force of the blast threw Amara and her friends backward, their bodies crashing into the stone floor. The energy dissipated, leaving the chamber in a stunned silence. As the dust settled, Amara struggled to her feet, her head spinning. The once overwhelming darkness was gone, replaced by a calm, soothing light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The chamber, though damaged, was no longer filled with the oppressive energy of the abyss. The statues lay broken and inert, their power neutralized. The masked man was nowhere to be seen. His absence left a void, a chilling reminder of the malevolent force they had just confronted. Lisa, Mike, and Tara joined Amara, their faces showing a mix of relief and exhaustion. They looked at the remains of the orb, the shards of crystal scattered around the altar. The energy that had once threatened to consume them was now nothing more than remnants of a dark power. "It's over," Lisa said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We did it." Amara nodded, her heart still racing from the adrenaline. "Happiness is free now. The abyss is gone." But as Amara, Mike, Lisa, and Tara made their way through the remnants of the abandoned parking lot, the echoes of their victory still resonated in the quiet night. The orb lay shattered on the ground, its eerie glow extinguished, leaving only scattered fragments behind. The weight of their recent ordeal hung heavy, but relief mingled with the somber realization that their fight was far from over. "What now?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling with exhaustion. Her eyes were fixed on the broken orb, still reflecting the faintest glimmers of the otherworldly power that had once pulsated within it. Amara's thoughts were consumed by the enigmatic figure who had haunted them throughout their ordeal. The masked man, known only as M, had vanished without a trace after the orb was destroyed. His absence was as mysterious as his presence had been menacing. "I don't know," Amara admitted, glancing around the parking lot. "He just disappeared after the orb was shattered. It's like he vanished into thin air." Mike nodded, a grim expression on his face. "But why didn't he try to stop us? If he was so determined to keep the orb, you'd think he'd have fought harder." Amara's mind raced back to the final confrontation. The masked man had been strangely passive, almost resigned when they had destroyed the orb. It was as if he had expected them to succeed, or worse, as if he had wanted them to. The group carefully collected the fragments of the orb, knowing that they needed to find a way to properly dispose of them. The destruction of the orb had left a lingering sense of dread, and they couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal was far from over. As they prepared to leave, Amara received a notification on her phone. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it hesitantly and found a single line of text: "The game is far from over. Watch the shadows." Her heart skipped a beat. Was this message from M? Had he been watching them all along, even after their supposed victory? The group exchanged uneasy glances. "What does that mean?" Tara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think it means that M isn't done with us yet," Amara said, her voice filled with resolve. "He may have retreated for now, but there's more to this than we know. We need to stay vigilant." As they walked away from the parking lot, their minds were filled with questions about the elusive figure and the broader implications of their ordeal. M had disappeared, but his influence still loomed large. The cryptic message suggested that the shadows of the past were far from being fully unveiled. In the days that followed, Amara and her friends continued their search for answers. They scoured through old records, interviewed anyone who might have known something about M, and delved deeper into the secrets of the orb. Their investigation revealed more about the dark forces that had manipulated them, but M's true identity and intentions remained shrouded in mystery. One thing was clear: the shadow of M still cast a long and ominous presence over their lives. The game had changed and the stakes had risen. Amara and her friends had survived the initial confrontation, but they were now caught in a web of darkness that promised to ensnare them further. As the night grew darker and the search for answers continued, they knew that their journey was far from over. The true nature of M and the secrets of the orb would eventually come to light, but for now they had to navigate the shadows and prepare for whatever came next. And so their story continued, a tale of bravery and uncertainty, where the echoes of the past lingered and the future remained uncertain. The shadows of M were far from finished, and neither were they.